let's do a little bit more introduction here now that we saw some examples, right? You're picturing those in your mind. Now, the design and testing of internal controls is a critical part of any audit, right? Definitely important there. And we'll see this over and over, but it is management's responsibility to design, implement, and maintain the internal controls. Not the auditor's responsibility, right? They don't work for the company. That's just something I'll say, and we'll see it again. So we'll just get used to that. There are many potential deficiencies that can occur in internal controls. So getting into this talk of deficiencies, we will get to significant deficiencies. What are those? But overall, what's the concept of a deficiency? Just an issue with those internal controls. And it's important to identify and assess these deficiencies during the audit process. Now, some common deficiencies would be inadequate segregation of duties. Someone has responsibility over two processes within the organization. Insufficient documentation, maybe we don't have proof that something was approved, and weak controls over access to sensitive information. Definitely something that you can see and visualize within a lot of entities. Now, to properly design and test internal controls, the auditor must have a thorough understanding of the client's business and its environment. This happens in the planning stage, if you remember. For pretty much every engagement, we need to get an overall understanding of the entity and its environment. The auditor should also perform a risk assessment, which we do in the planning stage, to identify potential areas of risk. And then once the auditor has a good understanding of the client's business and its risk, he or she can design and test internal controls that are appropriate for the client's specific needs. Now, when we say design here, it says design a few times. We're talking about the tests of internal controls. So just avoid any confusion. We are designing tests of controls. We're not designing the internal controls for the client. We're designing the tests of controls, and then we are testing those internal controls using the tests of controls, which talk about that in audit risk. We talk about that throughout the entire exam. There are many different ways to test internal controls. Now, some common methods are interviewing employees, observing, right? We talked about all of this. We've got substantive testing that you can use on tests of controls, examination, observation, performance, reviewing documentation. The auditor should select the testing methods that are most likely to identify deficiencies in the client's internal controls. Here, you're not just verifying the numbers, you're possibly reperforming the test of controls, you're reperforming the actual internal control to see if you get the same result, to see if it's operating properly. Right? Maybe you reperform the entire cash rec. Might sound like a lot, but maybe it's not, depending on the client. You reperform that to see if you get the same answer, and if you do, then okay, looks like the internal control may be operating properly. All right, I promise, last introductory slide. Just want to give a holistic view on all of this. Now, internal control is a process affected by those charged with governance, management, and other personnel. Really, it's everyone's involved with it, down to even someone who works as a cashier. Let's think McDonald's, even the cashiers who work minimum wage, something like that. Those individuals are involved in the internal control process. Cash registers need to have internal controls over them so the cash isn't being stolen, just as much as those in management need to have internal controls over them to make sure that they're not committing fraud either. These internal controls, right, are here to provide reasonable assurance about the achievement of the entity's objectives. Now, the entity's objectives are to provide positive financial performance, provide accurate financial statements, also just to not have cash stolen, right, to not have assets stolen. All of these things are bolstered by this process and procedures of internal controls. For reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of operations. Our goal is to sell McDonald's is to sell burgers and make money from that. If you watch the documentary on McDonald's, it's also real estate, but not to get into McDonald's business model. Right, in compliance with laws and regulations. Oh, we love laws and regulations, don't we? Now, internal control over the safeguarding of assets, because we've got inventory, we've got machines, we've got equipment, and it's not just the cash that someone might want to steal. They might want to steal the equipment because they could sell that equipment. They might want to steal, I don't know, a bunch of hamburgers, right? And you get pretty hungry at McDonald's if you're an employee. We want to have safeguards of assets against unauthorized acquisition, use, or disposition. Maybe you just accidentally throw out a bunch of things because you thought you needed to get rid of that machine. It's not even possibly fraud. Maybe you have internal controls to make sure that no employee accidentally gets rid of a machine because they think it's broken, right? You can have internal controls to test to make sure that this disposal of a machine goes through multiple checks before actually getting disposed of. Now, generally, controls that are relevant to an audit of financial statements are those that pertain to the entity's objective of reliable financial reporting. You're going to test these internal controls mostly. Obviously, not your job to get into the internal controls over operations objectives. That is something, talk about SOC reporting, talk about integrated audits, all of that. Now, in this section, the term financial reporting relates to the preparation of reliable financial statements, shocker, that are fairly presented in conformity with GAAP, good old GAAP. The design and formality of an entity's internal control will vary depending on the size, industry, culture, and management's philosophy. We'll talk about this in multiple lessons as well, where there's a cost benefit analysis to segregation of duties, to internal controls. If you are a very small company and you can't hire a whole new employee to properly segregate those duties, well, one employee may have, let's say, authorization and record keeping. It's just there's a cost benefit analysis. You're not going to spend $60,000 a year to hire a specialist who can do something if you're a company that's only making $200,000 a year. That just would not make sense. So again, cost benefit analysis depending on the size, the industry. If there are certain industries with higher risks in safeguarding of assets, right? Google doesn't have any inventory. I mean, okay, fine, they got phones and other things, but let's say you work for the search engine business. There's not really any inventory to safeguard. You get the idea. Different industries, different businesses have different responsibilities and ways of managing their. Here is a nice little graphic, which we would have seen in our audit risk as well. Just kind of a reminder here. What is our audit approach to internal controls? Well, if internal control is non-existent or weak, our control risk, the risk that controls will provide inaccurate financial data, is high. And what are we going to do when performing control tests or tests of controls? We are not going to do anything. And why is that? Well, because we can't trust them, or there's just no internal controls there, right? You might think, okay, well, wouldn't we do a lot of testing? Well, actually, you're not, because if there are weak internal controls and you know they're weak already, there's no point in testing them. If a car has 4 tires missing, you're not going to try to drive that car. You're going to look at it and say, okay, this is pretty evidently not working. However, what you are going to do is you're going to perform the maximum level of substantive procedures. You're going to try to lower detection risk and do as much testing there as possible. What if we meet our way in the middle? There's some internal controls, right? It's just kind of like in the middle, medium. Yes, you're going to test the controls. You're going to do a medium level of substantive procedures. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have, what if we have strong internal controls? Well, we assess the internal controls. Control risk is going to be low. We are still going to perform tests of controls. And then we're going to do minimum substantive procedures. However, you're still always going to need to test material accounts and transactions. The general note could be a multiple choice question there. Make sure you take a note of that. You're always going to test material transactions and balances. Hey there. Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.